Now for the scripture lesson, which we can guess will be David and Goliath. It's from 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 40 through 51, taken from the Message by Eugene Peterson. Then David took his shepherd's staff, selected 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the pocket of his shepherd's pack. Then with his sling in hand, he approached Goliath. As the Philistine was pacing back and forth with his shield bearer in front of him, he noticed David. He took one look down at him and sneered, "This is a mere boy. He's apple-cheeked and peach fuzz." The Philistine ridiculed David. "Am I a dog that you come after me with a stick?" And he cursed him by his gods. Come on," said the Philistine. "I'll make roadkill of you for the buzzards. I'll turn you into a tasty, nasty morsel for the field mice." David was not afraid, and he answered, "You come at me with sword and spear and battle axe. I come at you in the name of God of the angel armies, the God of Israel's troops, whom you curse and mock. But this very day, God is handing you over to me. I'm about to kill you, cut off your head, and serve up your body and the bodies of all the Philistines, your buddies, to the crows and coyotes. The whole earth will know that there is an extraordinary God in Israel, and everyone gathered here will learn that God doesn't save by means of sword or spear. The battle belongs to God. He's handing you to us on a platter." Well, as you might guess, that aroused Goliath, and he started toward David. David took off from the front line, running toward the Philistine. David reached into his pocket for a stone, slung it, and hit the Philistine hard in the forehead, embedding the stone deeply. And the Philistine crashed face down in the dirt. And that's how David beat the Philistine, with a sling and a stone. He hit him and killed him. No sword for David. Then David ran up to the Philistine and stood over him. He pulled the giant's sword from its sheath and finished the job by cutting off his head. When the Philistines saw that their great champion was dead, and when they remembered what David had said about the coyotes, they ran. They scattered. They were running for their lives. So ends the reading of David and Goliath.
Well, that is a rather dramatic and partly gory text, but it definitely sucks us in, doesn't it? I am definitely paying close attention. And when you look at it from the storytelling perspective, this is indeed delightful and well-known biblical story. And there are many cultural references afterwards, as well as there were many preceding stories before that. David and Goliath might not be the oldest version. For that, we can look into classical mythology or Sumerian cuneiform texts. But David and Goliath is, at least in our culture, the best known. And if you want to describe such a situation, such a plot, you would simply say this is David and Goliath situation. How the little and humble guy was bullied by a big and menacing guy. and how the little one, after some gripping and thrilling moments of suspense, eventually came up on the top. It is interesting how, regardless of our cultural background, we all find ourselves rooting for the Davids of these stories. It could easily be used as a diagnostic tool by psychiatrists, psychologists, and psychoanalysts or therapists. If someone roots for Goliaths, there is something seriously wrong with that person and their psyche. Healthy, wholesome, well-socialized people do not normally root for the bullies. And so, we all love to perceive ourselves as Davids. But what if? What if we are in the position of power, with overwhelming weaponry and technological advantage on our side? I would claim that we need to, and we should, pay even more attention to this story, to remind ourselves not to throw ourselves around as those Goliaths of stories and history. It is crucial to hear it from this side as well, because from the history we know that Goliaths usually eventually lose. Austrian Habsburgs kept my country of my ancestors, in their grip for hundreds of years, but not forever. British occupied India or Kenya for a long time, and often brutally, but not forever. Russians occupied Central Europe for decades, but not forever. They went to Afghanistan, but not forever. That should ring the bell, just like Americans. American army went to Afghanistan or Iraq, but not forever. There is a divine rule behind it. If the taking is not just, the little ones would eventually win. That is a cautionary tale for all the big guys, for all the potential bullies, frankly, for all of us. Whenever we are in the position of overwhelming power, and I don't mean only national powers, it can be multinational corporations, it can be a big bank, it can be anything, even overwhelming power in our personal lives, in our family lives, in our workplaces. The bigger the asymmetry of power between that who has it and that who has not, the more we need to self-examine and be cautious, because there is no glory and, frankly, no future, historically, but even as we hear in the Bible, in God's eyes. There is no future in God's eyes for bullies like Goliath. So it is an encouragement for all the Davids not to give up, and a warning for all the Goliaths. Watch your manners. Watch how you behave. And be triple time more cautious. That is exposition of that text, and that is why I pick it, because I find it quite poignant and important. But this is also a series of sermons about who wrote the Bible. And there are very interesting information behind this story and hints coded directly into this text, which can open our minds, I hope. And we can start with the weapons and armor. And, I did not want to force Nora to read for us like 2 chapters of this text. I selected just a small part. You will need to believe me that there is a description of Goliath's armor, like half of the chapter earlier. And there is something which might escape modern readers, but would be quite well understood by people who listen to these stories early on. Goliath's armor is not the one of the Bronze Age Philistine warrior. No matter how often we hear the word bronze, and in the description in just 2 verses, there are like 4 references to something being made of bronze. So no matter that bronze is mentioned a number of times, it is not a Bronze Age Philistine warrior. That does not fit the description. And David's sling is not necessarily indication of pastoral simplicity either. Goliath's armor is an excellent example of what can be called anachronism. It means something which does not fit time-wise. Goliath's armor is, when you look at it and pay attention how it is being described, an armor of an Hellenistic hoplite or Hellenic hoplite. That was an free aristocratic Greek warrior, say from Athens, that would be the most we would recognize, or Sparta. His whole weapons and armor are fitting that almost perfectly. And David's sling was actually a regular military weapon. And all armies of antiquity, at least from the times of Persians, all the way down to Roman times, had units of slingers. Not just one like I was here on the carpet slinging paper ball. No, those were real dozens and dozens of those with real projectiles able to throw them something like 400 meters, 400 yards away. That is a long distance. There are accounts of slingers in Homer, in Xenophon, in Roman annals, histories. Of course, slingers were not the main brand of the army. They were classical light infantry, skirmishers, making life difficult before and around the battle. And sling projectiles were found around the ancient Mediterranean basin, some of them specially cast of lead, the heavy metal projectiles, like the one on the bulletin cover you have. On the bulletin cover is an ancient sling projectile, and on it you can see that it It has a message cast directly on it. And it reads Dexai. And it can be translated, of course. And it is like that ridicule. Occasionally you can see even these days warriors putting the messages on bombs or something like that. So this is that kind of message. Here you go. Or catch it. Or something like that. But they were not just a joke. They could fly, as I said, hundreds of yards and could be surprisingly accurate. Not like when I did that, I could not aim. But they were very much better doing it. And accurate and lethal. There are accounts of famous generals being killed by a sling projectile. So, anachronism of this story, armor from a different age, and weapons which become popularized in different age. The cultural milieu and intentional archaisms of rituals like single combat, that there are two warriors in duel fighting for each other army. And all of that kinds of points to a different time, including, I must not forget, that ritual of stripping of armor of a defeated foe, which even had in ancient times a name, spolia opima, and was associated, for instance, with Romulus, the founder of Rome. And David conducts that. All of these points leads us to Hellenistic time of the composition. It was written as an encouragement for the underdogs fighting with much greater power. The much greater power of Greek weaponry and tactics. One can guess that it might be, for instance, the time of Maccabean revolt, when Jewish Maccabeans revolted against Seleucids from Syria. And just like the Psalm 110 points in a similar direction, it is a psalm which is dedicated or assigned. It is supposedly written by David, but it's acrostic. First letters of each verse, more or less. The first is slightly different, but each letter of each verse spells out Simon the Awesome. And it was the royal psalm. And it was in the celebration of Simon the Maccabean, ruling priest and king at that time. The psalm was clearly also not composed by David, even though it is said in the Bible. It was composed hundreds of years later. And the context of David and Goliath is off by hundreds of years as well. What does it mean? Those stories are truthful regardless whether they are history or much later stories or legends. Here I can quote a Neoplatonic philosopher of the 4th century of Common Era, after Christ, Sallustius, who said about myths, myths are things that never happened but always are. And we can apply it to these legends. These legends about Goliath and David and Goliath, are stories which never happened, but always are. Secondly, this way of understanding is actually releasing, liberating the message even better. It's not about the distant past. We recognize that this is our lived experience. It liberates us, that story, from perceiving it just ethnically or nationalistically. David is not always a Jewish hero. It can be a Persian or Greek hero. And Goliath is not just that Philistine villain. We actually recognize that he was most likely Greek. And it could be a Jewish one in a different time if he oppresses and bullies the weak ones and bombs them into smithereens. Or it can be us, friends, me and you. Thirdly, we must take scholarship and reality seriously. I will expound what I actually said last Sunday. Because reality is being pushed away all the time, and it is scary and dangerous. We must take scholarship and reality seriously and not hide from it. The church and faith should be the first place where we seek and submit to truth, and not the other way around. The first place where we hide from truth. Just look at what is happening right now in America, in the Bible Belt. The current deadly, macabre show of unreason, disrespect for reality and for one another's lives, putting aside masks, discouraging people from vaccinations. What do they want to do? It is almost like being transfixed by death. It pains me to see churches being deeply implicated in all of this. I want to scream, this is not Christianity, this is not what faith is. And I know I am preaching to the choir here, I am preaching to those converted, but hopefully there is a way of spreading it around. Last week, it indirectly happened to me, because one of those who attends our services, actually my wife, took it to the hospital, and there was a nurse who was against the vaccination and was using religious arguments against it. Like, I'll be protected by Jesus. Thankfully, my wife listens and has her own faith and her own mind and her own deep spirituality. And first she said, I'm Christian also, and my husband is a minister. And you know what? In our church we hear that we mask and we take vaccinations, not only for our own selfish reasons, but because Jesus commanded disciples to take care of the little ones, children who cannot be vaccinated, those who are immune compromised among us. That is the reason I am wearing mask. That is the reason I am vaccinated. And it gave her a pause. It gave her a pause, because that was a fresh, new angle for her to see religion not being a vehicle of selfishness, but of altruism. In the church, in the center of people's intimate spiritual life, we need to be trained about truth, about the reality, and not to believe utter fundamentalistic fabrications and lies. If churches school people to trust lies and unreason, and if they learn disrespect reality and reason in their pews on Sundays, in their deep spirituality, what would you expect? I am really upset with those false prophets who are preaching heresy of selfishness and harm. That is why it matters that the Bible was not written by David. I'm returning back. I took a long excursus here. But that is why it matters to be truthful about biblical scholarship and about other matters of faith and about the science. That is why it matters how we orientate ourselves and how we orientate our faith. That is why we must not close our eyes from scholarship, from reality, from the evidence, especially not on Sunday mornings. Reality and truth might not be convenient at that moment, or we might not know what to do with it. We might struggle with it. We might work on it. It might not be comfortable, because there is a saying that true thinking sometimes gives you pain. It hurts. But we must worship in spirit and in truth. And I'll combine it in truthful spirit, because truth and reality matters to God and to life. Amen.